Hello and welcome to this Lightroom video. My name's Beckham. I'm an amateur photographer. I've been asked to make some videos using Lightroom. Now I do have quite a number of those already on my website and on YouTube, but I admit that I've done nothing new recently. So here goes. Can I say firstly that the differences between Adobe Camera Raw and Lightroom is almost nothing at all, because they're both very much the same software. The reason I wish to say this is to make people aware that generally speaking, you should be able to follow a tutorial made in Adobe Camera Raw even if you're a Lightroom user and vice versa. In actual fact, it's not the actual software we use that's the vital issue. It's the techniques, and they remain much the same no matter what software we use. Having said that, I do understand the need to see manipulations done in the software you use. Sometimes I also wonder if it's worth considering a little bit of photographic philosophy. The complexity and time taken with image editing is a direct result of how good the original raw file is at the time you captured it. An image that's shot in good lighting conditions with few distractions and it's well exposed is going to be easier and quicker to manipulate. An image that was not shot under the best conditions, whether those conditions were down to photographic mistakes or not, is a very different thing. The image editing here will be more time consuming and it'll require different tools to achieve a good result. Let's take a look with this image, and I've chosen this one because normally we would adjust global editing first and then strategic editing of isolated areas of the image. But here things are just a little bit different because the background and the subject require manipulation almost completely independently of each other. Now, if we attempt a global change either for the background or the bird, we're going to have a problem here. If I drop the exposure down to darken the background, we clearly make the bird a lot worse. But if I raise the tones in the bird, we clearly make the background a lot worse. So there's a good indicator that global editing in this particular case may not be the right choice. Now, something I rarely hear said is that creativity in processing an image can be as important as it is when we shoot the image. Now, this is a practical subject that many amateurs may be faced with. A darker subject, too dark in places, against a light background. So the approach we're going to need here is to manipulate both the background and the heron completely independently of each other. Now, the way I'm going to do that is to use the new tools of masking which were introduced into Lightroom late 2021 for the year 2022. So let's close up the basic tab and I'll click to select the masks. And the one I want to start with is select subject. We'll click it and allow Lightroom to mask the subject. And look at the job it's done. Now, what the masking means is I can now make adjustments to just the bird isolated from the background. But in actual fact, it gets just a little better than that. Allow me to show you one or two things about masks. One of the first things that may be useful is we can rename a mask. So if I go to mask 1 here and double click, I could call this my heron. So I can always instantly identify it. If we go back to the mask panel, if I click on the heron mask, we can see that it's made up of two parts. Think of the top part, the labelled part, as a group, because we could have a number of different masks attached to the heron. For example, the masking we're currently looking at is made up by the automatic subject selection, But if it actually selected too much, I could choose subtract. From these options, I may want to choose a brush and remove some of the masking if the effect of what I wanted to change was too great in one area. And if I did that, you would see another one of these little squares appear below the heron group. I'm sure we'll get to that at some stage through this video. We can turn the overlay on and off at any time, but even if we've got it off, we can always identify the mask by just mousing over it. Very quick and convenient. Once we've made any changes, we can turn them on and off with the little eye, and we get a number of options here. Here we can rename the mask itself. We can do that with a double click. We can intersect a mask with any of the other masks. We can duplicate the heron mask, which we may want to do to pick up the background later. We can hide it, delete the heron, or in fact delete all masks. I'm going to turn the mask back on again, and what I'm going to do is go over to the right hand side. Here we've got a little box that says reset sliders automatically. I like to have that ticked, so every time I make a change to any mask I'm starting from scratch, but we can untick that and then it will apply the same settings we applied previously. So if we was putting a linear gradient on the left side and then we wanted to do the same on the right, we could use exactly the same settings. Personal thing, and you'll soon figure out which works for you. We also have an amount slider here, but I would like to skip past that and just go to the little drop down option here and open up all the controls for this particular mask. Because even though I've got the mask overlay shown, as soon as I go to any of the tools and let me go to my shadows and raise them to lighten the bird, as soon as I do, as you can see, the mask is removed visually. It's still doing its job, we just can't see it. Now, how far do we want to go with those shadows? Probably something like that, I would guess. Do we want a little bit of exposure too? Maybe just to lighten the bird a bit. That's, I think, all we need to do with the bird. So the next thing we need to think of is the background. Now, one of the best ways I think we can come at this is we can either duplicate the heron or we can just reselect a new mask and then just invert that. There's options all the way around. Tell you what, let's go back to the option at the top left of the palette and we'll select here to select subject once again. Letting Lightroom do its job. There, it's selected the bird. Over on the right hand side, I'll tick to invert the mask. And now we can concentrate on just the background. And once again, as soon as I go over to the options here and click and drop down the exposure on the background, the mask is removed. Now remember, we can always double click the mask and change the name. But I don't think it's going to be necessary to do this for most of the editing we do, simply because we can just mouse over and see exactly what's been selected or masked. So when we come to our background, if I click it again, we can see it's been created by an automatic subject. But as I look at the image, I think I may want to squeeze a little more exposure into it, or less exposure. So I may want to fiddle with the sliders, which we can do as many times as we wish. Now what I'd like to do next, if we look around the edges of the image, the bottom, the top, to some degree the left and the right, but more the bottom and the top. We've got a bit of a weakness at the bottom. We've got a weakness down here, which I think will look a lot better if it's a bit darker. So let's select a filter to do that, or a mask to do that. The one I'm going to select is the linear gradient. As soon as I do that, I can click and drag up from the bottom. Now, the mask tells us exactly what we're going to affect. Now I'm encroaching on the bird here, but we can see that the legs of the bird are quite pale, so I don't think we're going to do any damage to the bird here at all. And it's never a bad idea to have a look at what the changes are going to look like before you start to adjust the mask. But here, all I'm going to do is drop the exposure. So over to the right again, click and the mask disappears. You can see what I want to do. I want to give my image a bit more of a solid base to stand on, and I'm quite happy with that. So now I'd like to put a linear gradient at the top of the image. Now we do have shortcuts to be able to do this. If I hit the little plus up here, you can see the shortcuts all along the right hand side. But for this video, I'm going to stay with selecting the one I want. So once again, a new linear gradient, and I can click and drag down from the top. Now we can see that whatever I do at the top of the image is going to impact the bird. Whether that impacts in a negative way, well, we need to try it and see. Let me just straighten that up a little bit. Over to the exposure here, because what I want to do is to just drop that down to give myself a nice dark top. Now it doesn't do a great deal on the bird, I must admit, but there's going to be times when what I've just done impacts the subject a lot more than it has here. So let me quickly demonstrate how we would deal with this. Remember this mask, we can double click, we'll call this our top grad for short. So if we think of that mask as our group, we know it's made up of a linear gradient, but what I want to do now, I want to take away some of the masking of that linear gradient. When I select it, I'm going to choose a brush. Now to work on this bird, I need to zoom in. So I'm going to go to 100% and we'll navigate to the top of the bird. Now to be able to demonstrate what I want to do here, I'm going to go over to the options. Where are they? Let's have a look to find them. Let's open this up. Here we've got the options for our brush. Generally I work with the density at maximum. I adjust the flow to get the effect I want. The feather I generally have quite high, but there's always times when we want to adjust that. The size of my brush, I'll adjust that using the square bracket keys to the right of the letter P on the keyboard. But for this little bit of demonstration, I'm going to push the flow way up so you can see the effect. So as I wipe on here, you can now see what that gradient is doing to the bird's head. It is darkening it sufficiently that we may want to remove the masking from this area. Now you can see that when I've got the flow up very high, the masking reacts very quick to my brush. Generally speaking, again, I know I use that word a lot, but generally speaking, if we work in a more measured way, so we have to go over the image 2 or 3 times to get the same effect, it's much more forgiving and you'll find it a lot easier to work. If we now look at that top grad, we can now see that there's another option. It's made up of the top grad group, if you like, which primarily was a linear gradient, but we can see a little minus alongside the brush there, which tells us that we've taken away some of the impact of that gradient. Let me fit that image back on screen. Now I think my image does have a little bit of weakness in front of the bird, not a lot, but I certainly think I can darken that left hand side a little bit. So once again, hit the little plus, linear gradient, click and drag. I don't want it to come too far onto the bird, that's not going to affect the bird at all. Take the exposure, just darken that a little bit. I'm going to do the same at the back of the bird as well. So once again, linear gradient, click and drag, drop the exposure. You can see we're gradually focusing more attention on the bird itself. Now how much work we do is going to be a personal choice, but let me just demonstrate one other option. We do have a light area under the throat of the bird. I don't think it's significant here, but we could darken that down and we could use another mask using the brush. So let's take a look at that. Let's first zoom in. Let's have a look at 100%. Is that going to be big enough? I think we'll probably just about get away with that. Now you can see that this area is not too bad, but it could be in a different image where this could be a little too bright. So we get the opportunity here to go back and hit the little plus once again. We can do this as many times as we wish. Choose the brush. Remember, we've got the brush options on the right hand side. What do I want to do here? Well, I want to drop the highlight. So I'm going to drop them down before I even do any brushing. I'm going to drop the highlight. I'm guessing here a little bit, knowing I can change this any time. So dropping down the highlights, dropping down the exposure. Maybe I'll drop the size of the brush down just to get a feel for this. You can look at the flow rate is around 36%. And I can start to brush over the area and you can see it's gradually reducing the tonal range there, and how much I want to do is going to be purely a personal thing, isn't it? But there you can see the techniques, they're not difficult. If I wanted to do small areas up there, then I would probably zoom in even tighter and I would make my brush maybe marginally smaller. And I could even do tiny areas like you can see there. Let me go back and fit the image on screen. Now, one area I'd like to deal with here is an important area of the bird's face and eye. I think we've got a little area there where we could lift the tones. And once again, I've not been naming all of these just to speed up the video, but let's go back to the options again and select another brush. Perhaps I was a bit hasty coming away from that zoom. Let's zoom into the eye and the face. That's a bit big. I think I'll go back to 200. That's a bit better, I think. Because all I want to do here is just raise the tones in this area. So with the mask, I've got the overlay turned on. I could work in this way, as you can see. Whether we use the flow up or down, you'll soon get a feel for this. So I want to get something done there with the eye, with the colour part of the eye. So here I'm going to go down to the option to adjust the exposure. So I'm going to raise that, but I'm also going to push up the saturation. Maybe I'll raise it a bit more. So I've got a nice bright eye. But I may even make another mask to go around the edge of the eye. So let's do that. A brush. So what I want to do here is a little bit around here, just to raise the tones. So there's the sort of masking I want to do. Let's take a look. I'm just going to lift the exposure just to brighten it a little bit. I can make my brush a little bigger. I could drop that flow rate back a bit. And now I could just give this a bit more emphasis around the eye. Sorry, I just hit a rocker switch on my Wacom pen there. There you can see the idea. And just to demonstrate it a bit more, I'll just go down here and just lift the throat of the bird a little bit too. We're all going to choose to do something more or less when we do this sort of work. It's all purely personal. Let's fit the image back on screen. If you look up at the mask window, you'll notice that I've gone ahead and given all of the masks that I didn't name at the time I created them a name. And I suppose it does indicate that it's a good idea to consider this, because here, in a basic manipulation like this, we have 9 masks. The number of masks we create and where we create them and the adjustments we make within those masks is what I was talking about earlier on when I said creativity in processing an image can be as important as it is when we shoot the image. Now, generally speaking, I use Adobe Camera Raw. And the panel here, we can move to different locations. Now, I'm sure I can do that here by just picking this up. See, the hand changes, or the cursor changes to the hand. So I could pick this up and I could drag this to another location. I won't do it on this particular instance because I don't want to spoil the continuity of this particular video. But what we may want to do is, because we've done all of the editing using masks, what I could do is go up and turn the masks off, and we would instantly see a before and after. So if I give that a try, there's the image we began with, and with just a little bit of editing, nothing too complicated, but just working through gently, dealing with the issues as they arise. And one of the great things about working with raw files in this way, we can return to those masks and make as many changes as we wish. I'll see you next time.